Sergio Marrero, and tonight we're here at RBL1 Live with Anna Palmer, who is general partner at Flybridge Capital and founder of xFactor Ventures. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. To share a little bit about Anna before we dive in, she is not only the general partner of xFactor Ventures and Flybridge, she's a graduate of Harvard Law School and Eureka College, serial entrepreneur, started the Fashion Project as well as Doe before her journey into being an investor. So excited to hear more of that story tonight. But if you can share with the audience, what is xFactor Ventures?
So xFactor Ventures is a pre-seed and seed fund focused on backing extraordinary female founders. And the thing that makes us a little bit unique is that all of our partners, we have 22 partners in 6 different cities. All of us are operators. And so we've been in the trenches. We understand what it's like to be a founder. And then we're the ones that are actually writing the checks and then putting our networks behind that and helping that founder succeed. And then xFactor is a part of Flybridge and connected there as well. So my role as general partner at Flybridge really dovetails nicely with xFactor.
So how are, I mean, and we'll take a step back. So in this group, there's, you said there's over 20 partners investing in female founders. How does that work? Is it a traditional fund, or is there also syndication? How does that, compare to a traditional fund?
Yeah, so we operate as a true venture fund, so everybody shares carry across the team. We do have a couple of quirks though, in that since everyone has day jobs and we're doing this alongside of it, we all operate off of Slack. And so everything is virtual, which now in COVID seems, not that crazy, but before COVID, obviously it was. So everyone's distributed. And then we make those decisions based on those discussions that happen online.
So even the selection and the investment committee, like the due diligence and the investment committee meetings, all done over Slack?
Yes. Yeah. So we have channels for every deal and everything goes in there. So yeah, we'll hop on the phone with each other, obviously, if we need to, but almost everything happens on Slack.
That's amazing. Can you share a little bit more about the relationship between Flybridge and xFactor?
Sure. So xFactor actually grew out of Flybridge. So initially Chip Hazard, who's one of the partners of Flybridge, and I had co-founded xFactor together. And the very first fund, it was 3 million. It was kind of a minimum viable product. We were seeing if it worked. We had 9 partners. It turned out the model worked really, really well. And so we scaled that up to now our second fund, which is close to $9 million. And those 22 partners that I was talking about. But Flybridge is still a big LP. And then Flybridge is kind of the overarching umbrella, which on xFactor sits underneath.
Excellent. That's amazing. I want to take a step back because it sounds like you're an investor, but with strong founder roots. So I want to go back to, can you share a little bit more about what inspired you to go from being a lawyer to being a founder?
I kind of fell into it, actually. So my plan was always I was going to go to a big law firm in Chicago, and I had this life plan mapped out, as everyone does, I think, when they're in their early 20s or in grad school. And I started working on a fashion project with my co-founder, which was one of my friends from law school. And the impetus behind it was we saw this opportunity to really change the way that people donated high-end clothing. And a lot of that came from a tax class that we sat in law school. So you can imagine, fast forward, we're getting ready to graduate, and I had a job offer sitting there from a law firm in Chicago. All I had to do was just register for the bar exam. That was it. And I sat in front of my computer for maybe 10 hours the day that the actual registration ended that night. And I just couldn't get myself to hit submit because there's something in my heart that said, no, you shouldn't be at the law firm. You have to solve this problem. And if no one's going to solve it, it's something that needs to exist in the world. And so I ended up just closing my computer and never hitting submit. So I couldn't even take the bar. So I couldn't take a law job. I had to make fashion project work. And so it was a way of burning the bridges basically behind me to make sure that I had to fight to be an entrepreneur. but it worked out really well. And I'm really thankful for that journey.
That's amazing. So can you share a little bit more about how that was moving from fashion project to eventually to Union and Fifth? Like how did that happen, and how did you grow the business?
Yeah, so we ended up selling the company, and Union and Fifth took over, and then had to try to integrate those two things together, which was a challenge in and of itself. But was super thankful that all the team at Union Fifth was amazing, and we landed in a great place, and our team was taken care of, and everything worked out.
But how did you go from raising, I mean, even with the fashion project, for those that don't know, raised over $13 million to build that business, and had, thousands of items on the platform. Can you talk a little bit how it went from, being a concept to successfully raising, especially now with, we even hear in 2020 how very few amount of funding goes to female founders. How did you guys make your way through that challenge?
Yeah, it was an adventure. So we were two law students that had no idea what we were doing in e-commerce, entrepreneurship, et cetera. I still remember our very first event we ever did was a charity event that we were getting people to donate clothing. And it was a poster that we had printed out on a laser printer and just like held up with these boxes that we got from the post office for free that we just taped things on top of. Like it was so minimally viable. I don't even know if you could say it was viable. We started there, and then surprisingly though, there was enough of a need that people started giving us things. So if you're willing to put a designer handbag into a box that looks like that, we figured once we maybe had a little bit of branding and tried a little bit harder, had some professionalism there, that people actually would donate their clothing, ultimately buy it on the other side. And so that's where we started. And I think the big breakthrough for us is we got into Techstars, which, I mean, I still credit, there was one of our angel investors that we had talked to early on that asked me to pitch at an event. And it was one of those days as an entrepreneur where everything went wrong. We had an investor that had backed out. We were, up against a wall as far as cash. Like it was just a really tough day. And he was like, no, just show up and pitch here. And I did. And one of the judges was one of the people that ran Techstars in Boston and ended up drafting us into the program. And that changed the entire trajectory of the company. And so it's interesting to think about how like one decision in one small moment can actually change whether or not you make it as an entrepreneur.
That's amazing. And why did you guys sell?
A number of things, but we had raised our A, we had done a couple of big retail programs, kind of knew what the model looked like, and then had a couple of things happen that just meant that it felt like the right time for the company. So did that, and then moved on to actually be on the venture side pretty shortly thereafter.
So yeah, if you can talk about that, from your background, it seemed like you shifted from there and then was on the board of trustees at Eureka College. I don't know if that's the same time, but moved to another venture, Doe. So how did you shift from now your startup being acquired to go to Doe?
Yeah, so I had worked with Union and Fifth for a while. I think, as you know, if you're an entrepreneur, the bug to keep starting something is just always there. And so had thought about a couple of different ideas, but Doe was really built out of necessity, in that I had started xFactor Ventures that I mentioned alongside of Chip Hazard at Flybridge 2 years before that, I guess, kind of right out of fashion projects, and saw the need for female founders to get funding. But there were a ton of founders that weren't venture backable because their businesses were just not ever going to be venture scale. And so the idea behind Doe was, let's create a marketplace, make all these amazing companies easily visible and available for people to come and shop. So then that way, maybe they're not going to be getting venture funding, but they can actually be funded by consumers.
Amazing. And so definitely a serial entrepreneur at heart.
For sure. Haven't been able to shake it yet, but
no, I love it. No, it's great. And you, if you can share a little bit in terms of, the challenge that you just shared. And I see that quite a bit. We just had a founder on the other day, that excellent founder. She's building a business. It was I would say less conventional VC investment because of it's a product. It's not software enabled, so they may be growing 20-30%, but the what is it, the doubling and tripling you would expect or you aspire to have with venture backed deals, it just fits into a different category, but it's still an excellent investment. So can you talk a little bit more about how to what alternatives exist, or what do we need to do to better serve that class of entrepreneur, because they're still entrepreneurs and great businesses.
For sure. Well, Doe is one. So quick shameless plug for the company. You can still go on and list your business. And then ultimately we help with promotion, marketing, drawing consumers in. So the goal is to help fund through sales. But I think you've seen this, especially on the female founder side, this insurgence of asking that question and trying to find new ways for capital. And so looking at platforms like I Fund Women is a great one, which is more crowdfunding, but really geared towards those types of businesses. There's also a great resource called Hello Alice that does more of the small business lending, connecting people to financial resources that maybe aren't traditional venture. So I think you're starting to see people trying to address that need in different ways. And it's been interesting to see that, especially through the startup lens as well.
Are you seeing any potential innovation in the space that's better accelerating early stage founders?
Oh, interesting question.
I'll give you an example of stuff aspects that we've come across is the advent of revenue-based financing. Some funds now, Collab Capital, that are offering on a similar, still revenue-based financing, like it's on rather than taking equity, so that people can buy back some of the ownership. What I don't know if there's different. As we think of innovation, what's interesting is for venture capital, usually they're like venture capital itself, like the model hasn't changed all that much, right? For being such a investor in innovation. So what are you seeing that can disrupt venture itself?
Hopefully they don't disrupt us too much, because then I'm out of a job. But I think all the things that you mentioned for sure. And then, like I mentioned, the crowdfunding platforms are interesting. I think also you're seeing a lot of innovation around how do you reduce costs for some of those businesses. So how do you think about potentially doing collaborations across companies such that not just one has to pay for marketing, and so it cuts the cost? Or how do you think about maybe building something like the influencer marketing side of making something to where you're not having to foot the entire bill for Facebook ads, et cetera. So I think you're starting to see people ask those questions. Personally, actually, on the venture side, one of the things I've been really interested in is financing products that layer on top of potentially like a Facebook or an Instagram. So I'll put a shameless plug out there. If anyone's building this company, please come talk to me. But we've seen, like with Doe, a lot of the founders, most of the things that they're raising for are marketing, trying to get the word out. And so a lot of that is going to Facebook ads, Instagram ads, et cetera. But if they have predictable sales, you should be able to finance that in some interesting way where you're essentially fronting the cost of those ads and then getting a share of the revenue. And so if anyone's building financial products on top of that platform, please come talk to me.
Yeah, I've seen a few early stage startups trying to build things in that space. It's fintech is definitely at the core of what we look for. What inspired you to go from being a founder to being an investor?
So initially with xFactor Ventures, it was that through Fashion Project and meeting with hundreds and hundreds of investors, I probably met with 200 plus. We had 60 people on our cap table, one of which was female. So that just tells you how skewed those dynamics were. And so I saw that firsthand, but alongside of that, I saw my fellow female founders just building amazing companies. And so I thought there was a disconnect there. And so the idea of xFactor was, why don't we just build this thing to get more capital into the hands of women entrepreneurs? And then from that, I had a front row seat of working with founders while I was building Dough, but really seeing what the investor life is like. And I loved the idea that rather than just having this one thing that I was building, I could help all of these other people achieve their vision as well. And especially where we were playing, I mean, when you're the first or second check-in, that really matters. And it can be game changing for that entrepreneur. And so eventually I realized I was being pulled that direction. It was an opportunity for me to not just focus on building the thing that I wanted to build, but really empower other people to change the world and do their vision as well.
Amazing. And in doing that, I know you also shift from building out xFactor in partnership with Flybridge. How did that even occur? How did that even happen?
Yeah. It just happened through a conversation, actually. So I was familiar with Flybridge. I had pitched them for fashion projects, and I still remember this, and that they, in the meeting, Chip, the one that I partnered with on xFactor, had caught something in the business model that ultimately would be problematic when we scaled, and no other investor had caught it. And so they ended up passing ultimately. But I still remember thinking, if I ever do something again, I want to partner with that guy because he's obviously the smartest one in the room. And so Chip and I had known each other through that network. And then through a series of events, we had a nonprofit initiative that formed after the election. It was back when Hillary Clinton was running. Chip and I were working on that together. And then through that came the conversation of, could we actually build this thing to help back female founders? So it was a pretty organic process through that.
Amazing. And congratulations on the partnership at Flybridge. Yep. So can you talk about how it shifted from xFactor Ventures to now being a partner at Flybridge? What's how did that happen, and what's different?
I think that the biggest thing that's different is just having the opportunity to do this full time. In that with xFactor, I think one of my frustrations was always, I felt like we were doing it maybe like you're trying to do it on the margin, or you're digging into companies, but you never feel like you can give it, 300%. All of us are giving it 100%, but as founders, we like to overachieve. And so switching to being able to do this full time, we felt like there was so much more opportunity there with xFactor to build it into something even bigger and greater than what it was. And so it's been nice to have the brain space to be able to do that, looking at building out the next fund as well.
Can you, I think you're going over something that the audience may not be familiar with, that xFactor in the beginning, you didn't do it full time, right? Like you were operating, you had a job while you were running and founding xFactor. Can you talk about that? Like what, like if you give us a snapshot of, after it launched, like what were all the things you were doing?
So yes. So the way that would work is essentially like anytime that you have breaks from doing company things, xFactor was essentially like the thing that was replacing scrolling Twitter or like checking Facebook. Like it was, instead you're looking at deals. And so it's happening kind of in the margins of building the company. And when we created the model, we actually created it to allow for that. So our partners can have red, yellow, or green status. And green means like, hey, like I have a lot of free time, send me anything you want. Yellow is like happy to look at things with other people, but might not have bandwidth to take it on my own. Or red is like, I'm heads down fundraising, etc. Like just give me a second and I'll come up for air. So we designed the model actually to be something that operated alongside of your day job. And so I did that for, I guess, 3.5 years before coming over and doing it full time.
Amazing. And thinking about, and alluding to, I'm poking at some of the challenges there. Is like, as a founder or as a VC, right? Starting a smaller fund, right? It's not always possible early on to do it full time, just because of the finances of the fund.
Yeah. We also found though that by nature of having us all have day jobs and doing this alongside, our thesis was that we wanted that to happen because we wanted them in the flow. We wanted to be talking to founders. We wanted to still be really close to that really early ecosystem. And so I think the model with xFactor has been interesting because it's really played out to be that kind of side hustle for people by design. And so it's been interesting to see that over time. And it has been true. I mean, if you're in the trenches building your thing, you're going to know who else is kind of 2 steps behind you because they're reaching out to ask for mentorship.
Excellent. How do you select your partners in xFactor?
So we have a bunch of different criteria, but the primary ones are we want to make sure that we have domain expertise across anything that we'd potentially see. So we have everything from one of our partners has a degree in astrophysics or aerospace engineering. She's a legitimate rocket scientist. So we have that all the way down to, the consumer founder who had built an incredibly successful beauty company. And so we look for diversity, both in thought and then diversity of geography and other characteristics as well, to try to figure out what the optimal combination is to get full coverage across any female founder that's starting something anywhere in the country. Hopefully xFactor is seeing
it. Great. And for you, where do you guys want to take it in terms of your next steps? You talk about Fund 2, $9 million. How do you envision xFactor Ventures growing?
So already we've done a little over 60 seed investments. So I think we're one of the most active seed investors for female founders, period, which is exciting. But we think there's tons more room for growth. So next fund is going to be bigger than this one. We're adding a couple more cities. And then from there, I think we start thinking about, are there other places that we'd want to play as far as like Series A? Do we ever want to potentially be doing follow-alongs, et cetera?
And how do you think of, I'm going to go back to, you mentioned sharing the carry with all the partners. How do you, can you talk a little bit more about the model? How did you come up with it? And what have you learned?
We wanted it to be different than your typical scout program where everyone's kind of off independently doing their own deals. And so sharing carry across the fund was super important to us because we wanted to make sure there was that collaboration. And when we created it, the thesis was twofold. It was, one, we need to get more capital in the hands of female founders. But 2, we need to try to change the pipeline for women who could potentially become general partners. And so we wanted to structure the fund as a way that's almost like a training ground. I think one of our partners called it a masterclass in venture capital, and have it work like a true venture fund. So then that way, coming out of xFactor, you had that experience, you knew what it was like to debate deals, you knew what it was like to be pitching in on things that your partners were doing, et cetera. And so that's why we shared carry across the fund as opposed to doing just like typical scout, you get the carry for the deal you do, period.
Excellent. What were some of the biggest challenges for you in terms of building, now you're a partner, and no longer on the founder side. Is this a temporary place to be before you start your next thing, or how has it been being an investor? I know I asked you a few questions, but I'll leave it there.
I've loved the investor side so far. And so I don't think of this as a temporary stopover. I think what I found is that there's actually a lot of innovation still within the realm of what we're doing. I mean, we're still trying to figure out what can xFactor be, 5 years from now, what's Flybridge going to look like 10 years from now. And so there's still a little bit of that builder mentality that's happening, but I've really enjoyed it a lot. And I think you asked the biggest challenge question. I think the thing that has been the biggest challenge for me switching from entrepreneur to investor has been trying to take off my founder hat and truly listen to the business that the entrepreneur that's pitching me is trying to build. Because I think as founders, I don't know if anyone else has this experience, but you automatically see like, oh, okay, if like you just did this and then you did this and then you did this, then there'd be this big opportunity. And if I was founding it, I would maybe think about doing this. And you kind of like impose your own judgment onto what the founder is telling you based on your experience. And I think great venture investors, the first thing you have to learn is just to listen and really listen hard to what's their vision and what are they building? And then how can I support that? Not how do I get them to do what I think is the vision? And so I think switching that mindset of founder builder to investor, listener, supporter has definitely been the biggest shift.
Amazing. And if you were to start a venture tomorrow, what would it be?
I was to start another company tomorrow?
Yes.
Whew, what would it be? I will actually answer this by saying one of the things that I'm looking for that somebody is starting.
Okay.
So if someone is starting, let me know. I think there is a huge opportunity to build a multi-billion-dollar marketplace that focuses on the things that are nearby.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about how easy it is to go on Amazon and get, KitchenAid mixer shipped to you from 5 states away, it should be even easier actually to figure out where that's sitting within 2 miles of you and then get that delivered to your home. And so I'm interested in anyone who might be building the logistics marketplace infrastructure around the products that are sitting within a radius from you, as opposed to the big Amazon, multi-warehouse, multi-state model.
Excellent.
Yeah. Building that, come talk to me, because I'm happily on the VC side.
There you go. So for those looking, the link will be in the live stream, or is in the live stream notes. So what's next for Flybridge Capital and xFactor Ventures?
We are on the hunt for the next founders that are building big, ambitious, billion-dollar opportunities. So we were still looking to source deals, to scale. We're going to be, I think, raising for xFactor, the next fund, sometime starting end of next year. So a lot of fun things on the horizon, but right now, really just looking for, if you're a founder that's building an awesome company, come talk to us.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for watching Rebel One Live. Thank you, Anna, for joining us tonight. For those that are just tuning in, this was Anna Palmer, general partner at Flybridge Capital and co-founder of xFactor Ventures. Please join us and tune in for Rebel One Live next week. So thanks again, Anna.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.